Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Drapers Connects. My name is Graham Moran, and I am the acting editor here at Drapers. Drapers Connects, for those who are joining us for the first time, is our series of digital events and virtual content that we launched at the beginning of the pandemic as a way of staying in touch with our industry and connecting people with their colleagues and their peers. So it is a variety of panel discussions, Q&As, and other virtual content, which you can actually watch online in our archive of Drapers Connects content. But today, thank you for joining us. If you're watching live on Zoom, this is intended to be an interactive session, so do feel free to ask questions via the Q&A function, which we will put to our panelists at the end of our discussion. Today, we will be discussing how businesses can achieve digital excellence and uncovering tips and advice to accelerate online revenue and growth. This is something that has obviously been at the top of the agenda for many businesses, but is something that has only accelerated over the last 12 to 18 months as a result of the pandemic and shifts in shopping behavior. So I'm very happy to welcome our panel today. We have Tim Ryan, who is the Director of Digital at lifestyle retailer Seasalt. Hi, Tim.
Hello.
And we have Chris Baldwin, who is the VP of Marketing at Insider. So to kick us off, today's webinar is in partnership with Insider. So Chris will give us an introduction to the company to give a bit of context to our conversation. Over to you, Chris.
Cool. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Like Graham mentioned, I look after marketing here at Insider. If anyone is unfamiliar with Insider and the work that we do, we offer one powerful platform to help power personalized cross-channel customer experiences. And we do that today for over 800 leading global brands and retailers. So Seasalt being one of them, which is why Tim is here. But we also work with the likes of Marks & Spencer, Puma, Estee Lauder, and a few others as well. And really why we partner with these brands and retailers is really to help accelerate their digital growth, connect data across all their different channels, and just help deliver personalized experience in the fastest time to value.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. So to kick us off, over to you, Tim. I know through your career, you've worked at a few fashion businesses, including Reiss and Karen Millen, and you joined Seasalt at what maybe you didn't know was going to be quite a turbulent time just before the pandemic kicked off. Could you tell us a bit about that journey and kind of your role at Seasalt?
Yeah, sure. In terms of the start of my journey, it's been quite an interesting one. So I started pretty much bang at the start of COVID. So I'd accepted my role pre-COVID and then came down to Cornwall at the very start of it. So probably a good place to be, at least. In terms of kind of where we've come from, where we're striving to get to, I think it's we're probably one of those businesses that's trying to get to that digital first. And I think a lot of businesses have really shifted that way because they've had to, stores obviously being closed. And now the role of stores is kind of changing. We've kind of been able to flip how we operate certain things in terms of kind of enabling our stores to fulfill orders for our online, and kind of really how we become a truly like omni-channel business that kind of is leveraging both channels and kind of working in a more cohesive way.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. So as part of that discussion, how to leverage those channels, particularly digital, we have broken today's discussion into kind of 4 topics and 4 lessons that hopefully our audience can take away. So the first one that we're going to discuss is the importance of personalization and how to grow e-commerce revenue through personalization. Tim, why don't you start us off by kind of telling us, well, let's start with the basics. What is personalization? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to Seasalt as a business?
So I think for us at Seasalt, it's about relevance. So fundamentally, that's what personalization is about. It's not necessarily about giving like a one-to-one personalized experience, but kind of giving the most relevant experience to the customer. And what works for a company like Seasalt might not work for a different retailer. And that's all because it's all customer centric. And I think a lot of retailers are trying to get to that customer centricity, which is critical and kind of the right approach. It's just about understanding who your customer is and then kind of acting accordingly. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we treat all customers in a specific way. It's just going like, we need to try and make things easier for the customer, try and give them the easiest journey possible, understand what their objectives are for their online journey. Is that to kind of find the right product for them, to be inspired, to find their local store, and then kind of signpost that as easily as possible. So taking all of kind of the data that we have, all of the information, all of the signals that they're giving to us, and then acting accordingly. So kind of putting rules into the system that gives a tailored approach that's going to give them the easiest kind of journey possible on the site.
Yeah, I think there was a period where everyone thought of personalization as, you know, an email that says your name, or, you know, I remember when there was Mr. Porter, when you logged on, it would personalize Mr. Porter to say Mr. your surname. But obviously things have kind of come on a lot from then. And I think it's kind of a bit of a pun, but personalization is personal, and it's very different. I think you made a really good point when we were preparing for this, that personalization is kind of different for everybody, different for all businesses, which I think is really interesting. But I mean, it's an obvious question, but do customers resonate with those kind of relevant, tailored experiences? Like, is it really that important? Is it something we should all be thinking about as fashion businesses?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's critical. It's doing. I think there's the kind of the benefits of doing lots of different things, and we've done some light touch personalization, where it's just about streamlining the customer journey. So one of the tests we ran was a kind of a pre-select on sizing. So based on previous behavior, someone selected a size 12, for instance, and then next time they come back to a listings page, it's just pre-selected on all size 12. So it's just stripping out kind of products that are going to be effectively irrelevant to them because we don't have it on their size, and giving that maximum relevance and just ease of the journey. And that's kind of had a massive uplift in terms of our conversion. So like 70% plus improvements on conversion for that kind of segment of customers through the test. And we're kind of obviously leveraging that against just seeing what the base level is to actually see it actually being incremental conversion benefits. So it does have a lot of benefits to it. I think there's so many different things. It doesn't have to be a big sweeping thing. There's just so many little incremental gains that can be had through personalization. And I think that's probably the trick to kind of personalization, is it doesn't need to be these broad brush, really big things that you kind of come on and you're wowed by it. It's probably smaller little incremental things that are all going to add up to a much bigger prize. Yeah,
definitely. Chris, you're nodding. Do you agree?
I do. And I think, Graham, you know, you mentioned personalization is such a broad term, you know, coming from those days where if you had Graham in an email, people would talk about that being personalized, and it's, you know, it's just not the case. I think what Tim had said around, you know, personalization at Seasalt being all around providing the most relevant experience, taking out friction points, delivering the most seamless experience, which obviously impacts conversion. You know, we see a lot of that in the marketplace. Increasing conversion isn't always the main KPI people are looking to drive through personalization. You know, Tim mentioned that every retailer is different, and what works for Seasalt, for example, the journey that Seasalt are trying to take their customers on is different from maybe a different retailer. And I think that just comes down to the fact that every business is totally different and will have completely different challenges. You know, maybe you put a lot of budget and resource into customer acquisition. So actually maybe your conversion rate is pretty good, but what you need help with is increasing customer lifetime value. And so that sort of profile of retailer will need to enlist and look at personalization in a totally different way, testing what do these customers care about. And it doesn't have to be huge overarching sweeping segments like Tim mentioned. I think there's a lot of testing, seeing what people care about, how you can use AI even to predict behaviors, but it's not just about increasing conversion. There are other things that you can look at leveraging and gaining from personalization, whether it is engagement, whether it's increasing average order value, or whether it's just trying to get a better return on your ad spend.
Definitely. Thanks, Chris. Another one of those sort of buzzwords that I thought came up a couple of times there that I thought it might be good to kind of define is that, we talk a lot about reducing friction. Tim, what does that mean? What does that mean to you at Seasalt?
I think it's about looking at the analytics and kind of treating it a different way. So kind of rather than kind of going, here are our KPIs and here's how they're trending and perfect, they're trending up, everyone's happy, they're trending down, everyone's not. It's kind of actually looking at what's driving those KPIs. So looking at kind of going, okay, we'll say conversions up by 20%, that's brilliant, but maybe 20% isn't actually where we should be aiming for. Maybe it's 50%, and understanding what it is, what the levers are that we can pull in order to kind of to improve that. And I think to Chris' point around kind of that doesn't necessarily have to be conversion, it can be around engagement. If we kind of are seeing a drop off in page views, or if there's particular pages that have got high bounce rates, it's about understanding kind of why they have bounce rates, kind of what is it kind of to do with their device, with the channel that they've come through on. Actually, the landing page isn't relevant because we're not serving them content that's relevant to kind of what they come in on. So it's about understanding kind of what these things are that are stopping people from continuing on their journey. There's always going to be kind of an end point to anyone's on-site journey, and that kind of they've got the information they wanted and they're going to go in store, or they've got the information they're going to compare it to a competitor, or they bought it, or they found the store location they're looking for. But it's about understanding at least what those objectives are and helping the customer to get to those as easy as possible. So it's kind of around how we can improve the signposting on site, how we can remove the clicks, and just ultimately make it as easy and enjoyable experience as possible. I think a lot of people initially, when they started doing online shopping way back, it was because people didn't like shopping. So there's the different people, the people who like shopping in store and the people who didn't. Now it's getting to the stage where it's a necessity for people to shop online because some brands aren't available, or some brands that you like don't have a store nearby to you. So what can we do to bring that in-store experience to online and vice versa? And it's then about going, okay, well, how can we have a cohesive journey as well? So understanding what they've done in store and trying to bring that to online, and kind of vice versa. So it's just about being as seamless as possible and kind of reducing any kind of potential barriers to not even purchase, but barriers to kind of their continuation and their enjoyment. Because I think when you look at a lot of the stats that are banded around about kind of abandoned basket and people who have had bad experiences with returns or with a brand and they never go back to that brand, it's about removing all of those friction points where possible, and kind of giving that overall enjoyable experience for the customer.
Definitely. I think that's a really great answer, because I think a lot of us in the industry talk about an enjoyable shopping experience in store, but we should also be making the online experience simple and convenient, but also enjoyable. Why it should be just as enjoyable. So
completely. I think that it's also that innovation piece where for an online business, there's kind of the capabilities and capacities to actually be a bit more innovative with the kind of the shopping experience. So I think it's not to kind of say that we can't do things differently online. It's just about doing it in a way that's not just for vanity purposes, but it's actually giving a value to the customer.
Yeah. Chris, do you agree from your point of view? Obviously, working with lots of businesses across the industry, you must have a kind of an overarching view. Do you agree?
I do, and I think reducing friction in the customer experience is always a massive priority for retailers and brands, and it's quite remarkable when you speak to brands and retailers and you ask like team leads or leaders, well, how, when was the last time that you shopped on your site, or when was the last time like you actually set a task for your team? So what I like to encourage brands and retailers that I work with is really instill this culture of friction hunting through the journey. And the way that I've seen this delivered before is, so someone, for example, in Tim's role would say, okay, well, we're going to appoint a cross-functional committee of friction hunters. So you might have one person from the marketing team, one person from merchandising, one person from customer services, and you essentially appoint them with, okay, well, go and find the perfect outfit for a wedding, or why don't you go and find the perfect jeans for you, for example, and then you record how that experience goes and you list out all of the little friction points or the little issues that people will naturally fall into. And it is really funny because it can be the smallest thing, like a button on animating the way you'd like it to, up to something which is a little bit more significant, like potentially your imagery on your PDP isn't working, or when you try and zoom in on an item, you can't actually see it correctly. And they seem like small issues, but actually when you add them all together throughout the experience, it has a compound effect. And like Tim mentioned, people do drop off, people will abandon, they might not come back. So by appointing those friction hunters and actually working through that list, whether it's a small thing or a pretty big thing, that's going to take a little bit of development work. I'd say friction hunting is a huge thing that I don't think enough brands and retailers are actively investing time in.
Definitely. I love the phrase friction hunting. I think it might be something we'll come back to a little bit later on. But I know we've talked a lot about the idea and the kind of concepts, but Tim, I thought it would be quite interesting to our audience to talk about specific projects that you've worked on in the kind of personalization space. You did kind of touch on it, but maybe we could drill down a bit more into the size pre-select projects that you worked on. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah. So kind of, as I mentioned before, we have been running kind of a number of different tests kind of since we've kind of been partnering with Insider. And I think what I particularly like about kind of Insider's approach is kind of that singularity of device. So rather than just having a kind of a personalization test running across kind of all devices, you can set them up, and you should set them up separately for kind of desktop, mobile, and tablet. So it kind of really effectively gives a better experience for the customer, which is ultimately what everyone's trying to achieve. Therefore, we've run tests where we've seen a much better performance on the personalization through desktop as opposed to mobile, and mobile as opposed to desktop. And it's not something that you necessarily think of in terms of kind of going, okay, well, I think that it's going to be just having an overall incremental benefit, but what might work on desktop doesn't work on mobile. So it's about how we can kind of run these small little tests across different devices, and kind of ultimately there might be a slightly different experience that you have on mobile, and there should, because you've effectively got a different mentality. We know that kind of people do a lot of research on their mobile phones out and about, or even in store. So it's about how we can then utilize personalization through mobile in a slightly different way to what we do through desktop, and being kind of using kind of our UX lead to kind of really get the kind of the best look and feel for what our brand is trying to achieve online.
Thank you. Is there anything that you guys I think we've touched on a few examples, but is there anything in terms of personalization in the pipeline, or anything that you are prioritizing kind of going forward? I know you mentioned that sometimes they can be really small and sort of like incremental, but they do make a big difference. So is there anything that you're really focusing on over the next few months?
Yeah, I think kind of one of the big focuses for us is probably channel. So both kind of the personalization in our own channels, so kind of through push notifications, through email. I think there's the whole host of things that we are looking to kind of run. Again, as you mentioned, they're kind of going to be small little incremental tests that we almost don't want people to notice and see, but it's just kind of understanding what's working, what's not, and kind of letting the data effectively guide us through. And then the other one is around kind of that on-site. So understanding that we've got multitude of different channels that we work through. So obviously email, push notification, but also paid search, paid social, organic social, affiliates. So it's going, these customers that are shopping through these different channels are all quite different. They've got different mindsets. And so it's about how we can personalize their onward journey when they actually click through. Whereas before we kind of have been probably optimizing the channels offsite. So kind of working with in Google, in Facebook or whatever. It's now about, okay, let's still continue to optimize offsite, but do that on-site optimization. So kind of looking at, we're already doing the work on improving the click-through rates, etc. But let's do the work on improving on-site engagement and conversion, etc. on the site.
Great. Chris, are you kind of hearing the same priorities that other businesses?
Yeah, I think a big piece is always on, ad spend and how you can optimize ad spend, especially with what we're seeing around, eradication of third-party cookies and stuff. So a lot like what Tim mentioned is around just making sure that you're utilizing channels in the correct way and you're not wasting spend. So for example, if you're trying to target someone off-site who maybe came on, they looked at a particular dress or a pair of jeans or a shirt, I think traditionally the retargeting would go straight down, social advertising. And what a lot of retailers are trying to do is say, okay, well, before we get to that point, how else can we either potentially create urgency or engage that user off-site? So Tim mentioned web push notifications. It's something that we're working on with a lot of our customers at the moment. How do you drive the right customer segments back to your website with the right message? So is it stock notification? Is it that something has just been reduced in price? If you decide that they are a segment that has a bit of an affinity to a discount, what is the right offer to get that person back onto site and complete a purchase? And how do you do that in the most cost-effective, time-effective way?
Definitely. Just a reminder to our audience, we do have a few questions coming in, which I'm going to get to. But if you have any questions, do get them in the Q&A function. Just in relation to what you were saying, Tim, about testing, somebody has actually asked, what tools do you use for testing? What have you found helpful in that space?
So we're kind of now looking to bring all of our personalization testing through Insider, and just to kind of be kind of more joined up. It's just a bit more agile in an approach, then kind of feeding that through into kind of our other analytics tools, so that we've kind of just got that joined up approach. And it's rather than having kind of a multitude of different products and services, it's just trying to kind of go, right, this is what we do for them, this is what we do with them. And it then gives a bit of a iterative approach that we can kind of follow through from our analytics back into Insider, understanding what's working and then optimizing accordingly.
Great. Someone's also asked, obviously all businesses are kind of on a different digital journey. Some are a lot more advanced than others. If there's maybe someone on the call who's sort of at the beginning of that journey, or particularly on the personalization journey, what do you think are kind of the barriers to starting, and what's kind of your advice as where to start? Why don't we start with you, Tim, and then we'll come to Chris.
Well, I don't think there's any right or wrong place to start. I think it's just about understanding what your desired outcome from the test are. So I think kind of I encourage our team to kind of just come up with hypothesis on kind of anything. But as long as there's a reason and rationale behind what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to test, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a positive or a negative, because ultimately we can test quite quickly and we can adapt quite quickly. So if it doesn't work, it's okay, well, what didn't work about it and can we adapt it? And change it and do something different, or if it just really didn't work and it was a dog of a test, then that's fine, and we'll just not do that again. So I think it's just about evolving the test, but kind of as long as there's a rhyme or reason. So I think it's kind of aligning kind of personalization to your key objectives, be that kind of site engagement ones, or if that's kind of more conversion metrics, and kind of then as a result going, okay, well, this is targeting AOV, or this is targeting dwell time, and then going, okay, my hypothesis is that if we were to do X, then we're going to see a Y result, and then testing accordingly. You then know what KPIs you're effectively measuring your personalization test against, and then you can really see if it has or hasn't worked, and then you can use the analytics both in Insider and through other analytics tools to understand whether or not you need to adapt certain elements of it, because I don't think any test is going to be 100% perfect, because then lots of us will be out of a job.
Yeah, that's why it's called a test. Chris, do you agree that that kind of, you just start anywhere is kind of the best approach to making changes?
Yeah, I think so. I think the danger that a lot of companies can fall into is, you talk about digital transformation and all of these big buzzword projects, and it suddenly appears very unfeasible and like a massive project. And like Tim had shared with the precise select example, that's, one area whereby it's not a small thing, but it's obviously something that is having a profound impact on conversion. That's just one test, for example. And I agree with you had mentioned what are the three challenges, or like what are the top challenges that brands and retailers, they commonly face if they're trying to become a little bit more digitally mature or get involved with personalization. And what I hear a lot of is data segmentation. So that's always a huge one. How can we actually segment our customer base? How do we know which segments to look for are going to be high value? And again, I think a lot of that comes down to testing. And like Tim mentioned, what are you actually trying to achieve? So if customer lifetime value is, for example, something that you're looking to drive, then you should probably look at segments where, you've got people who come, they buy once, and then they don't buy from you again. So that would be a way of then identifying the segment. And then the third biggest challenge is really, how do you bring together that data piece and the execution piece? So once you've got the segment, you know what you're trying to do, how do you actually deliver the experience you want through the channels that you need to, whether that's mobile, app, web, email. And that typically is a big challenge certainly when I start speaking to any retailer or brand just at the beginning of that journey. And Tim, you talk about is it your what, how, and why? In terms of how you work with all of your different vendors, that might be interesting to share.
Yeah, sure. So like in terms of that, we basically have, when it comes to kind of personalization on-site data, on-site analytics, we kind of have three main partners. So we use GA for the kind of the what, understanding what's going on the site, and kind of the KPIs there. Then we've got the why, which we partner with Content Square and understand a bit more about kind of what's driving the behavior. So GA tells us what behavior is happening on site, but it doesn't necessarily give you that kind of granularity or the color, the picture behind it, kind of understanding kind of the key drivers behind that behavior. So we get that through Content Square. And then the how is Insider, so taking the kind of the what and the why, understanding kind of what's happening on the site and then acting accordingly. So whether that is to enhance that behavior because we want to encourage it because it's good, or if we want to change that behavior. So kind of going back to that friction piece and kind of, okay, well, that behavior is leading to friction. As a result, we want to eliminate that friction. So then working with Insider to feed that, to improve that, give a different experience. And then feeding that back into Content Square, where we then analyze, see what's happening as a result of the test. And kind of it's a very iterative process. And then it gets to a stage where if a test is kind of working so well that we effectively want to develop it, we'll then feed that into our product backlog for development and then start working on other tests in the background.
Great, thank you. We've had quite a few questions on different kind of the same topic, but asked in different ways, which does kind of lead us into our second topic of conversation, which is around data and changes in privacy and cookies, and what impacts that's going to have on fashion businesses, and particularly when it comes to personalization. Obviously, data is kind of a conversation that everyone's having, but it's quite a tricky, it's another one of those things of where do you start? Do you have any advice, Tim?
I think our approach is for data is to kind of know what we know, and then to kind of understand what we don't know as well, and that's fine. Like, we're always going to be in a world where we don't know everything, and that's not really changed. It's probably exacerbated at the moment, but I think it's something that's been going on for a number of years. These big companies like Apple and Google they're always going to limit the level of data that we want. But it's about understanding kind of what we do have. So first party data, and kind of really leveraging that. So creating rules based off that in order to kind of give the best experience, given that relevance. So it's with that, I think testing becomes even more important, because with what you don't know, it's about then testing against that and going, okay, well, we don't know who these customers are. Well, let's run a test, and through that test we can understand at least their behaviors. We don't understand who they are, but we know what they like or what they don't like, in terms of, are they after content, are they after video, are they after kind of just quick links through to products, and kind of really being able to be honest and open with them. I think what customers are wanting now, customers and visitors, are just wanting transparency. So they want the ability to be able to change their preferences, and they want you to kind of not be over the top. Like, we're so far removed now from where we were, I don't know, like 15 years ago with Amazon, where you go on, you look at a gardening book, and all you then ever get served is gardening books throughout your journey. Like, Amazon, thankfully, have moved on quite far from that, and they're doing pretty well because of it. So I think it's about working through what data we have, what data we don't have, understanding kind of where that gap is in between, and then testing to try and at least understand a bit more about the data, the anonymous that we don't have, and kind of working through that. And then also using tools like Insider to feed in that first party data out into your digital marketing, and kind of being able to target through that. So there's a bit more kind of logic and science behind what you're doing kind of offsite, because there's already plenty of data and science that's going to your on-site behavior.
Definitely, thank you. Chris, you actually used the phrase earlier, so I'm going to pick on you to give us a definition about the concept of cookieless commerce, and this kind of impending change that's coming, although it has been delayed, I believe. Could you have a go at defining that for us, and kind of why it's important?
Yeah, I think I actually saw a recent journal research which said 41% of marketers, one of their biggest challenges for the year was going to be around cookies and the eradication of cookies. And essentially, like Tim mentioned, effectively what's happened is Apple, Google, and Amazon, they're all going to stop using third-party data. The Google extension, as you mentioned, Graham, was delayed. So I think it was going to be January 2022. It's now being knocked to 2023. But either way, there's going to be less reliance on third-party data. I think, to be honest, the companies that affects the most are the very, very large brands and retailers, where they're using like credit bureaus, data brokers. If you are a retailer or a brand who predominantly uses first-party data, then not much changes there. We know that from a behavioral targeting perspective, you're still, brands and retailers are still going to be able to use events on site and through channels. So, if someone adds to cart and if they click on a particular call to action, we're not going to be able to anonymously track everything that a user does, but there's still enough data available for brands and retailers at a first party level to be able to personalize the customer experience. And I think what we're moving towards is away from almost that surveillance capitalism, where like we're being tracked across everything and retargeted, to brands and retailers need to get much better at invited personalization. And actually, when I was a child, my mother used to say, "Shy Ben's getting out." And so I think brands and retailers have to ask customers, what are they interested in? What sort of content would they like to receive? And I think the gamification element of the customer experience will become really prevalent as brands and retailers trying to figure out more about their customers. An example that I always give is, I've been shopping at Sainsbury's, for example, for years. I've got a Nectar card. It's got Mr. Christopher Baldwin written on that card, but whenever I receive a Sainsbury's email, I'm always getting targeted for women's clothing, even though my salutation is Mr. on the card and it's not something I've ever bought from there. And I would actually welcome the opportunity as a consumer who does shop at Sainsbury's for my groceries to be able to give them more information to target and really personalize the offers, the messaging, the products that I'm recommended. I think that's where we're going.
I think that's really interesting. You kind of say, like, if you don't ask, you don't get, but having the opportunity to give more, I think as long as you explain what it's for, I think that's the sort of shift in mindset as well, is that, it's not, like you say, to surveillance, it's actually to help, this is going to make your shopping better if you give us this or this. So yeah, I think that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. We've had a question came up earlier around our mention of friction hunting, and that was another topic that we were going to come on to, about how important that idea is. And Chris, I loved your idea of, when was the last time you shopped on your own site? I had a story from a young women's fast fashion retailer who was, lots of the senior team were kind of older men, and they asked each other, when was the last time you shopped on the website? And now they all have to do it once a week. It's similar to your story. I think that's a really interesting lesson, to sort of go out and hunt for those issues. But one of the questions that we've had related to that is, how do you kind of structure your team around that? Like, almost whose job is that? How does that work at Seasalt, Tim?
So I think it's kind of giving ownership to a lot of people. It's not just a sole person's responsibility. Like, we have insights and analytics manager, but it's not his sole responsibility to kind of friction hunt. He kind of needs the trade team to kind of work on it. And I think it's where what I try to encourage is, because everyone's got different perspectives and different outlooks. So I think, to your point around older men being looking after a website for younger women and not being a target market, ultimately we need to get the customer in and kind of speak to the customer and understand what their kind of friction points are. So actually kind of getting that qualitative data from them. So we're kind of keen on kind of doing more of that, and actually having these kind of focus groups where we're actually speaking to them directly and getting their feedback, as opposed to assuming. And I'm not our target demographic, and I know that. So as a result, I can use data to inform me as to kind of where there are these friction points. But ultimately, there's the best person to tell me where the friction points are the people who are actually shopping our website. So doing a lot more of that. We kind of have UX function. So it depends on what the friction points are to an extent as well. And kind of if they are more site engagement, or if they are kind of operations. So kind of speaking, we've got operations managers who speak directly with our customer service team, our DC. So understanding kind of what the friction points are also from a internal, because although we look after the digital infrastructure and the site, there's obviously a lot of internal teams that feed into that. So it's understanding from them what their friction points are and what they're hearing from the customer, and kind of building those in. So in short, it's not kind of a one team. It's almost like everyone's got a responsibility to do friction hunting, but bespoke to their roles. And I think it's then also sharing these frictions as well. So friction sharing, a new one. Where we kind of, if there's something that you spot through the data or kind of from customer feedback or whatever it is, it's then going to the right person in the business and organization and kind of going, right, we're seeing this, we've actually been able to quantify it affecting X amount of people, are we able to do something? What should we be doing? Should we run a test? What's the hypothesis? And kind of going through that way.
I think, sorry, Chris, go on.
I was just saying, it's interesting listening to Tim's experience at Seasalt, and it's, you know, it's such a similar story that I hear about at different retailers. I think to really get that culture friction hunting and turn it into an initiative that really works for the business, I think first off, you need to have buy-in from your senior leadership team. So Graham, you mentioned, you know, that fast fashion retailer. It's obviously brilliant that they recognize there was a bit of a gap there. And I think that's where it needs to start. And then probably elect a champion from the senior leadership team to then produce that cross-functional team of friction hunters and almost formalize the process. So get a cadence in the diary. How often are you going to meet? Making sure that those people have got scheduled time to go on the website, giving them tasks. And they can be seasonal as well. So say if you're coming into a busy peak period, you might want to focus your friction hunting and testing around peak period for a particular time frame, for example. But yeah, I think formalizing it into a program is really, really helpful at just ingraining that culture into your brand, and making sure that you are constantly looking at removing those little frictions, producing the most seamless experience. And again, some of them will be big, some of them will actually be really quick fixes. But again, all of that compounds.
Yeah, that's what I was, now we've got friction hunting, friction sharing, but I was just thinking how can businesses friction prioritize? You know, you said you might see a really small thing, but it'll have a big impact, or you might see a really big thing that will actually have quite a small impact. Tim, how do you go about prioritizing what to, is that all down to the test and the results from your test? Is that the structure that helps you pick them?
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I mean, ultimately friction hunting, like friction in general, it's all around the customer, right? So it's what's got the biggest impact to the customer, and that doesn't necessarily mean what's going to have the biggest impact in terms of uplift of sales and conversion. It's actually what's going to have the biggest impact on the customer, because although we're obviously trying to drive sales through the site, it's the biggest bit of advertising we've got. It's the biggest bit of brand infrastructure we've got. So it's, if someone's having a bad experience on site, it's not just having a knock-on effect online, it's also having a knock-on effect in store, and just generally our brand is taking a hit because of it. So it's about understanding, okay, if this is going to have a massive impact in terms of people not being able to find so site search, for instance, we know the biggest retailer in the world, or in Europe at least, is Amazon. The fundamental basis of Amazon is their site search. So people like to search for things. So if our site search isn't working or isn't optimized, it's probably quite a big thing. And that is probably more of a big aspect for us to kind of be worried about than something that's kind of very low very at the very bottom stage of a funnel that will have a good incremental revenue perspective. But like if we need to fix that fundamental in the journey, there are kind of the fundamentals that need to be there. And if they're not working in a kind of a conducive way to have a good customer experience, then those are the priorities that we make. Then it's kind of about, okay, well, how do we balance the things out, and how many people is it impacting? So I think it's probably looking at kind of how many people it's impacting as well. And then it's probably getting into kind of more of the commercial aspects of it and going, okay, well, that one's going to have more of a incremental boost than that. Because I think some of those where the friction is so low in terms of who it's actually hit, the number of people it's hitting, it's just about then going, okay, well, this one's going to make more money. Probably get that.
It's like secret shoppers, but for your digital channels. I remember when we always used to have digital shoppers. I had my first job at Waitrose, and we used to always try and hunt out the secret shoppers to provide them the best possible experience. And this is all about making sure that everyone gets the best possible experience for whatever they're looking for.
Yeah, definitely. Great. And moving on to our kind of final point, which I think is before we go on to our audience questions. So we do have a few there. So if anyone else on the line wants to ask a question of Tim or Chris, and to get them in now. Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, Tim, you work with Insider. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was the importance of collaboration, particularly in today's climate. Why is that kind of an important part of your strategy, and how does that sort of affect how you work?
Yeah, I think kind of that's it. Insider to us and Content Square and other providers that we have, they're not providers to us, they're partners, and we kind of want them to be kind of bought into what we're doing as a brand. So kind of going right back to the start about kind of what we're doing for personalization, we're trying to give a good customer experience and give that relevant customer experience that's right for our customer, and our customer is unique in the fact that our customer base won't be the same as the customer base of our direct rival. It will be different because there's no possible way that any other retailer can have the exact same customer base as what we do. So as a result, we need to personalize to them and understand what they want. So when it comes to kind of working with the likes of Insider, it's about them understanding who our customers are and what, yes, we want to hear from Insider about what's working with M&S or Uniqlo or whoever it might be, but at the same time it's about taking those learnings and applying them as opposed to replicating them. So it's not just a kind of a find and replace, it's a find, amend, and then stick in, and then it's about kind of getting our providers to, or getting our partners to collaborate with one another as well. So we're very fortunate in the fact that Content Square and Insider are partners, so we work with them together, so we have transparency between what Insider are doing, what Content Square are doing, having joint calls. Therefore, we kind of got the benefit of them understanding what we're trying to achieve and working together in order to get the best results. Like, rather than being so prescriptive, it's about going, look, this is the issues that we're having. What would you recommend as the way? What's kind of the easiest way to kind of remedy those, as opposed to kind of being really prescriptive and then ultimately potentially not getting the best result.
Chris, from your point of view, kind of the other side, how do these, if a brand or retailer wanted to, collaborate with someone like Insider, how do they get the most out of that kind of partnership?
Yeah, I think it's all about choosing partners that actually understand what you're trying to achieve and your goals. Like Tim said, they have proven expertise in your field. So yes, the work that we do with Uniqlo or Marks and Spencer, it will be different to what we are doing with Tim and the team at Seasalt, because what they're trying to achieve is different. But if there's proven expertise there that, showcase that we work with many different fashion brands and retailers, and we have a very good understanding of consumer behavior, the way people go about the digital journey, I think that's a really, really big thing. But yes, I work for a vendor, but also I'm responsible for picking tech vendors for my own business. So I sympathize a lot when people are going through processes where they're trying to select and choose vendors, because it's tricky, and I've been there before, and I've led RFI and RFP processes, and it is tricky, and it's a big investment, and it's a really big responsibility to take that on. What I would say is there's a wealth of information available online to help you make a very informed decision and sort of shortcut your path to getting value out of your vendors. So we, for example, have an RFP toolkit, which we will actively give to anyone who is looking at, Insider or potentially looking at swapping out a MarTech vendor, just to help guide that conversation, make sure that the brand or retailer is asking the right questions and involving the right stakeholders. And then I would say the final thing is always make sure you're checking out user reviews. So, look at things like G2, which is 100% user review, see what current customers of those vendors are saying about them, how are they rating them, what are the pros, what are the cons, and you can then have a very informed and honest discussion, not only with your own team and your own stakeholders, but also addressing the points that need to be addressed with the vendor as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really nice to hear both sides of that, the collaborational partnership, like you say.
It is a partnership. It is, and you know, we pride ourselves at Inside on, you know, really partnering with our clients to help drive their initiatives and their goals. So it's nice when I hear someone like Tim saying, you know, he values that partnership and he gets that experience, which is nice. It's nice for us. Makes us feel warm and fuzzy.
Absolutely. So we do have a few questions from the audience. It might mean we're kind of jumping around a few different topics, but I'll try and pull together the kind of similar ones. Chris, I think it was you who mentioned the gamification of the customer experience. Somebody has asked, what do you mean by that? And yeah, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so like, for example, I was working with a retailer recently, and one of the things that they were struggling with was that repeat purchases. So a customer would come, they spent the vast majority of their budget and their resources all about acquiring new customers. But then once they were in their database, they put it in, they made their purchase, their repeat purchase and their customer lifetime value was really, really low. And what they were doing as their sort of engagement strategy was hit them with a newsletter, and it wasn't hyper personalized. And actually what they look to do then is they stopped sending newsletters for 2 or 3 weeks just to let that inertia go down. And then what they did instead was actually send an email which was, you know, why don't you tell us what you would like to hear about? And from that, it was gamified. It's a bit quizzy. So, you know, you select the things that you're interested in, you give a little bit more information, but you make it in a way that it doesn't feel like a chore. It's like those BuzzFeed quizzes everyone was doing on Facebook a few years ago. You make it feel that way, and then you can use that information to put people into segments of what they care about. You know, you can also use things like AI to build predictive segments. So based on historic data, well, which customers are high value spenders, which customers have an affinity for a discount or their return risk. And so I think you can use gamification through your engagement program to then sort of inform your future strategy and how you message the kinds of content and products that you offer each individual customer.
Very good answer. Tim, it's kind of related to that. I guess you were talking about customer segmentation. Someone has asked, how many segments do you tend to have? They've said that the issue they have with customer segmentation is creating the content to go alongside it. Do you have any thoughts on that? I
think it kind of, to an extent with the customer segments, that you can go to such a granular level that then it becomes too much to maintain. So I think it's probably having enough segments that you are able to kind of really give a kind of a more relevant experience, but at the same time not going to the too granular level that you have to create too much content. And I think the content it's all about repurposing as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be kind of brand new content and different content for different people. It's about different journeys. So it's kind of, rather than giving kind of different kind of content to the people, it's actually going, okay, well, let's just give them a different journey. So it's actually giving them a more relevant journey as opposed to the relevant content, and just making sure that those two match up. So I don't think, yes, there's going to need, when you're doing segmentation, there needs to be more content, but it doesn't have to be a huge amount. It's just about how you kind of build that together to give that cohesive journey. Yep.
Chris, anything to add? No?
No, I think Tim hit the nail on the head. I mean, yeah. I think don't run before you can walk. Start with segments that are linked to actually what are you trying to achieve. So if, for example, it is, you know, you're trying to find out who your VIP customers are, start with segments and behavioral patterns, things like that. And then just segment that one group from the main if you need to. Start with that, learn, test, and then you can start adding sub-segments. So it could be, for example, you know, it could be anything from like demographic information like gender all the way through to, you know, some things that are more subjective about like style or what sort of products people are interested in. But start with the basic: crawl, walk, run. Don't overcomplicate it.
Great. Tim, somebody has asked, you spoke a lot about testing. Do you have specific metrics or scores that you use, scoring metrics, when it comes to testing?
I think it goes back to the KPI. So it's kind of like focusing on what you're trying to achieve. So it's that goal base. So you're going, here's the hypothesis, and it's trying to achieve a improvement or a reduction in X. So that's going to be your primary, and you can have secondary KPIs but underneath it. But that will always be your primary objective. So it kind of goes back to why you're doing the test. What is this test trying to achieve? And then that is your goal. So if it's engagement as a broad thing, then you've probably got 3 things that you're going to measure it on, and that would be what bounce rate reduction, dwell time improvement, and pages per visit, like would be your 3 KPIs that you're trying to achieve. Whereas if you were doing something more kind of conversion based, then it would be looking at probably AOV, conversion rate, and pick another like revenue. And then go, look, these are the first 2, with the third being the revenue. So I think it's really about what you're trying to test. Really dictates.
Yeah, just take your baseline measurement. I would say, like Tim mentioned, take an average, take 1 or 2 measurements max, and then test against those metrics. So if it is something that you're looking to increase conversion rate, that's fine. You've then got your baseline, which is where you're at. How much are you trying to increase or reduce that by? And then you can test how that works over a period of, weeks, months.
Another question, which I think for me fits into the kind of friction element. Someone has asked, if you're a site that sells internationally, do you think that having kind of different currencies is a necessity, a good to have? The reason I thought that was interesting is because if that was me, I would see that as friction if I couldn't buy in my, my local currency. Do you guys have any opinions on that? Do you think that's a priority?
So I guess it depends on what the priority is for the business. So if the international growth is a priority for the business, then I'd say long term, you probably want to be dealing in their local currency because it is a friction. But then that also plays into the pricing dilemma, and if you have a matching price or not. So if you're getting a cheaper price by buying in hypothetically a UK site, then customers will probably be okay with buying at a cheaper price but not in their currency. So it's kind of really probably looks at those 2 elements as to kind of, they want a fair and transparent price, and ideally they would like to shop in their own currency.
Yeah, I think pricing strategy definitely comes in there. So is it a big ticket item? Is it a small ticket item? Obviously, if you're selling something which is on the lower side, you might be looking at customers who, they might have a higher propensity not to purchase if they don't actually know what's going to be hitting their bank account when that transaction goes through. If you're looking at something which is a much big ticket item, that might be less relevant. But I agree with Tim, if international expansion, borderless commerce is a big priority for the business, it's probably something you're going to want to look into.
And this might be our last question due to time, but I thought it was quite interesting. We've spoken a lot about digital and online, but somebody has asked, is our Seasalt working on in any way of trying to connect online behaviors and in-store behaviors? Obviously, we can track a lot of what happens online, but in store that's a lot trickier. And I know there's there's some initiatives that brands and retailers do try and make people swipe in with their login when they come into stores, things like that. Is that anything that Seasalt are working on?
Yeah, I think we're probably doing some of those activities, not all. So we're kind of definitely connecting up the orders by kind of having Y receipts, so kind of E receipts even, so that you can kind of see what's going on in store, but that doesn't kind of necessarily give you the full behavior. So then kind of really trying to build up kind of, we've got amazing staff in store, and actually kind of utilizing them to kind of to have those interactions with the customer, and kind of being able to maybe get them to log on and kind of get them to not share the information, but to at least kind of give us a guide as to, okay, this is what they want, this is what they don't. So I think it's it's kind of taking that information and probably not doing it on a kind of a one-to-one basis, but at least kind of getting somewhere close to that.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. So thank you to our audience for joining us and for all your questions. Hopefully we got through the majority of them. Thank you very much to Tim and to Chris and to today's partner, Insider. See you all on the next one. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.